Hello. So I would, by the way, if you're wondering, I've just had a shower. So apologies for my unkempt appearance, but um, yeah, just had a shower. Um, okay, so I want to weigh in to a subject that it's always sure to ignite debate. And anything that is debate worthy, I think is worth making a video about. And I want to talk about this phenomenon, particularly within my generation. Um, or so-called snowflakes. Now, I don't usually use the term myself. I prefer not to. I prefer to win arguments with arguments rather than just labeling people in a certain way. However, I can see where the term comes from, and I can see why it came about. And I am very much of the school of thought that there are some people out there who are far too sensitive. But I think it is important to be quite clear about this because it is open to all sorts of interpretations, right? Depending on your vantage point and depending on who it is making the accusation, i.e., accusing someone else of being too sensitive, etc. Now, this to me is very similar to the issues around political correctness. I don't like political correctness. That is, I don't like the idea that we always have to be very, very careful about what we say in case someone gets offended. And I don't think that taboo subjects should be off limits in case it offends a particular religious group or a particular minority group. I don't think that that should make subjects kind of off limits or that we should be overly sensitive in the language that we use. Clearly, a good deal of common sense needs to be involved. But I do think that this phenomenon of people being snowflakes and being overly sensitive very much ties in with identity politics. Now, the reason I say that is because it seems to me that with identity politics, and I'm already on record as saying that I really think that it causes far more problems than it's worth. Um, I think it ties in because the whole point of identity politics is that people don't define themselves as individuals. They define themselves by their race, by their sex, by their sexual orientation. And the byproduct of that is it means whenever they have a disagreement with someone, then it will automatically be, oh, they're saying this because I'm black, they're saying this because I'm gay, they're saying this because I'm a woman, or whatever it is. Those are just some examples. I'm sure there are white men who are too sensitive as well. So, I'm not saying any particular group is more sensitive than others. I do think that you get sensitive people in every group. But this is the problem with identity politics. It then becomes a victimhood narrative. And that, in my opinion, is extremely divisive because you end up in a situation where you can't have basic communication without them reading into it. And I think this is very much related to where the accusations of being a snowflake comes from, because there are people out there who will always think that if they've had a disagreement with someone or they've been treated unfairly, then it must be because they're a woman or they're black or they're whatever. When in actual fact, it might be one of two things: either they're being too sensitive or the person they're dealing with is just a dick to everybody. I get it. There are people out there who do have an obnoxious attitude to the world. They do treat people unfairly. And unfortunately, yes, there are examples of racist and sexist people. But I honestly believe in Britain today, I really do believe this. People who are genuinely hate filled, they genuinely think women are inferior to men, or they genuinely think they believe in white supremacy. I really do believe they're a very small minority. And if you listen to identitarians, the impression you would get is this is some sort of rampant problem. We hear things like everyday sexism. In fact, there was an incident happened a few days ago. I made a video about this, but I may just amalgamate it with this video. Young woman was on a train from Edinburgh to London, and there was some issue with delays or some problem anyway. Um, and she complained about it. And the conductor or the Virgin Trains male employee, called her, I think the word he used was darling or something like that, honey. Anyway, yeah, I think it was honey, right? And she made a huge issue out of this. She went to social media. She had this long rant about that extremely obnoxious term that women hate, that extremely patronizing term that women hate. She's assuming she speaks for all women. And she had this long rant. Now, my own take on that was his approach was a bit unprofessional. I think he then tweeted out, "Oh, what shall we call you next time? Do you prefer?" And then there was these other terms. I do think his attitude was a bit unprofessional. I will say that. But for her to run the social media with it and to run to the BBC with it, basically Virgin Trains ended up apologising for the sexism. But here's the thing: as a relatively young man, I often have older women talking to me and like calling me sweetheart and darling and so on. I don't always particularly like it. But in the grand scheme of things, I recognize that it generally doesn't have a malicious intent. Now, to be fair, in this situation, we weren't there. We don't know the whole story. But the problem is when someone makes himself out to be a victim in that way, and when they claim that they're representing everyone, I mean, what she's doing is she's taking offense on behalf of all women. If she's offended, okay, she's offended. But don't say you represent all women. There were many women commenting on the BBC report saying she needs to get a grip. And I honestly think that that's another aspect. There are people out there who are getting offended on behalf of everyone else. There are white people who choose to find something racist because they think it will offend minorities, and more often than not, it actually doesn't. An example of this would be people who say, "Oh, this isn't inclusive for Muslims," or "This might offend Muslims." That's actually insulting to Muslims because it's assuming that all Muslims are fiery Islamists, which of course they're not. Um, so that's another aspect. People need to stop taking offense on behalf of others. But to me, this isn't a case of you're either too sensitive or you're a complete dick. Okay, it's not. It's not about two extremes. It's just about common sense. Treat people fairly. Treat people with respect, but also try and be a little bit less sensitive. And I'm saying this about all of us. We all need to do this. I include myself. There have been times in the past, admittedly, I probably was too sensitive. And it's something I've reflected on, and it's something I thought, okay, well, maybe I need to just let it go. Um, I understand that there are things that you hear throughout your life that are based on ignorance. That can be very frustrating. Um, from my own point of view, I have my own niggling issues that do wind me up a little bit. When people, for example, no matter how many times that I tell them I'm from Northern Ireland, they say, "Oh, I was in Ireland once," and there is a real stubbornness, particularly in England, of not seeing the difference between Ireland and Northern Ireland, and that is frustrating. But I also know that if someone says, "Oh, I love your Irish accent," or "Ireland's a beautiful country," they don't mean any malicious intent towards me. It might be irritating because I am absolutely a British citizen, and etc., etc. But I do think that you have to look at the context of something. And we see with snowflakes, they always present themselves as victims, right? But actually, when you dig down, they are actually the bullies. They're the ones who want to destroy people's reputation and careers because of a minor misunderstanding or maybe an off color joke or something like that. People need to get a grip and stop being so damn sensitive. This can be found in certain socio political movements. If you look at third wave feminism, one of the many reasons I dislike it is because they take extremely trivial issues and they turn it into everyday sexism. So if a middle aged man says to a young woman, okay, darling, etc., maybe he shouldn't use the term, granted. But in the grand scheme of things, is that really a misogynistic thing? I don't think so. It might be somewhat inappropriate, right? But there is a generational factor here as well. The older generation in general, men and women, talk in a way that millennials wouldn't necessarily talk in. So that's another fact that we need to be aware of. I just think that it comes down to common sense. People need to realize that most of the time, people are not being malicious. And I get it. You get people out there. I mean, for example, I have no time for people who just shout out random things at strangers in the street. That's why I don't agree that wolf whistling is trivial. I don't think that when you get a group of men wolf whistling a young woman, I don't think that's okay. I certainly don't think they should face prosecution for it, but they have to put themselves in her shoes. You know, you could say, oh, she should take a compliment, but she doesn't know that wolf whistling will then lead to something more serious. I mean, I do understand that. I'm not coming from a point of view, oh, everyone needs to toughen up, because I think you can also go to the other extreme where we all become desensitized, and that's also not a good thing. Ultimately, it just comes down to common sense. It just comes down to getting a balance. Be a decent person. Don't treat people badly. And I would also say that in situations where someone clearly is uncomfortable, then stop whatever it is you're doing. Stop it. I don't accept that banter in those situations is just banter. There is a fine line between banter and bullying, and workplace bullying causes misery. It really does. So, you get certain, perhaps I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'm just saying this to sort of, come around full circle with this. You do get macho culture. You do get this machismo thing where, especially groups of young men, where they will take the piss and take the piss and take the piss. My attitude is it's fine if it's inclusive and it's fine if it is balanced out. I don't think it's fun when it is always aimed at one person. It doesn't matter if they have a sense of humor or not. When it is constantly aimed at one person, okay, so they don't have a sense of humor. Does that mean that you need to keep doing it? No. So when we're talking about sensitivity, I do think that it is also down to people who think everything is banter to also reflect on themselves and think, well, maybe I'm just being a dick. You get people out there, and I have to say, groups of guys can be like this, where it's this group mentality and they kind of take over and they think, oh, well, just have a laugh, we're just having a laugh. And they think that their way must be law, and that's it. If something makes someone uncomfortable, it doesn't matter if you think it's trivial, then stop doing it. Now, the caveat to this is if someone makes an honest mistake and they've offended someone, then the offended person needs to, if someone has apologized, or it's really, I think there are very, very few issues that people should be running to the police over, put it that way. Um, anyway, I'll round this up. Any one of these issues I could talk in with much greater detail, right? But I just want to come full circle and sort of say there are two sides, and both sides in their extremes can be a problem. So on one side, people can be too sensitive, particularly when we're talking about taboo subjects like sexism and racism and homophobia. Those are very, very loaded charges. So if you're going to slander someone that way, you need to be damn sure that it really is the case and it isn't they've just made some off color joke or something. But to publicly smear someone as a racist or accuse them of microaggressions or whatever it is, I do take a dim view of people who are looking for reasons to be offended. Um, on the other hand, there are people out there who never think before they speak, and they do need to be a bit more, frankly, a bit more considerate of others. Being considerate isn't being politically correct, it isn't being overly sensitive. I'll give an example. I don't believe that someone who has sex transition will ever be biologically male or female, right? That's my position on the transgender issue. However, I'm not going to go to a trans woman and say, "Oh, I think you're a man, so I'm just going to say he just to annoy you." That what would be the point of that? If I knew that would offend the person, if I knew that would bug them, if I knew it would hurt them, why would I do that? It doesn't make any sense. So long as they're not telling me you have to believe that I am a woman, then it's live and let live. It really is. So let me know your thoughts. To me, it's about two extremes. I do think there's such a thing as snowflakes. I prefer not to use the term so much, but I can see where it came about. You know, we think of those snowflakes as delicate objects. Um, Snowflakes can be easily ruined, etc. Likewise, people who are accused of being snowflakes are very, very fragile, and everything triggers them, and everything's offensive. I do think that those people need to get a grip. On the other hand, people who think it's just banter to make someone uncomfortable all the time, I've news for you. You're a bully, plain and simple. There's nothing cool about that. There's nothing bravado about that. And that's got nothing to do with standing up to political correctness or not being sensitive. That's just you being a dick, basically. Okay, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts.